Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a nightmare you thought was just a fairy tale. Forget the cozy cottages and happy endings, we're diving deep into the grim reality of Hansel and Gretel's survival. And let me tell you, it sucked. Like, really. Truly sucked, you might think. Oh, a little walk in the woods, some candy, no big deal. But imagine being abandoned, a mere child, in a vast, indifferent forest, where every rustle of leaves could be a predator, every shadow a threat. You probably wouldn't last a day, let alone outwit a cannibalistic witch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here and in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are there, standing at the edge of the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest. Though it's not yet called that, it's simply the woods, an endless towering expanse of ancient trees, their branches interlaced like the fingers of a giant, gnarled hand blocking out the sun. The air is thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, a smell that, for a brief moment, feels comforting, grounding, but that comfort is fleeting, dissolving with each hesitant step you take deeper into the gloom. You're small, so small, and the trees around you are impossibly tall, their rough bark feeling cold and indifferent under your touch as you reach out, almost instinctively, for something to anchor yourself. You remember the journey here, or rather, the lack of one. There was no grand adventure, no valiant quest, just a quiet, terrifying walk. Your father, a woodcutter whose hands were usually calloused from honest labour, had been different these past few weeks. His eyes, once kind, now held a haunted faraway look. He spoke in hushed tones with your stepmother, their voices like whispers of the wind through dry leaves, carrying a chill that seeped into your bones. The word famine was thrown around, a word too big, too abstract for your young mind to fully grasp, yet its meaning was palpable in the gnawing emptiness of your stomach. And then came the morning, the false cheer, the promise of berries, the almost too bright smiles. You, being the older one, the more observant, felt a prickle of unease. Your brother, Hansel, smaller and perhaps more trusting, skipped ahead, his innocent laughter echoing unnervingly in the silent forest. You tried to focus on his light-heartedness, on the small handful of crusty bread your stepmother had given you, but a knot of dread tightened in your gut. The plan, if you could call it that, was simple in its cruelty. Your father, pushed to desperation by your stepmother's cold logic, was to lead you and Hansel deep into the woods and leave you, abandon you, the sheer brutal pragmatism of it, a stark reflection of the Malthusian realities of the era, where surplus mouths were often simply eliminated. Historians still debate whether outright abandonment was a common survival strategy during periods of extreme famine, or if these tales served as cautionary fables to deter child vagrancy. But you don't need academic discourse to feel the sharp bite of betrayal. You feel it in the way your father avoids your gaze, in the slight tremble of his hand as he points to a cluster of trees, telling you to wait. You watch him go, his figure shrinking between the colossal trunks, until he's just a memory, swallowed by the forest. The silence that descends is heavy, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects and the rustle of leaves under a faint breeze. Hansel, bless his naive heart, believes he can find his way back. He pulls from his pocket a small handful of white pebbles, shiny and smooth, that he had cleverly gathered, dropping them one by one as you walked. He'd seen the breadcrumbs from earlier, little white flecks against the dark earth, but the birds had already had a feast. "Don't worry, Gretel," he whispers, his voice small but firm. "I marked our path. We'll be home before supper." You want to believe him, desperately, You trace the smooth surface of one of the pebbles in your own pocket, a tiny cold comfort. The hours stretch on, long and agonizing. The sun, when it does pierce through the canopy, moves slowly, too slowly. Across the slivers of sky you can see. The initial hope fades with each passing moment. The pebbles, Hansel's clever beacon, soon disappear, absorbed into the forest floor, or perhaps simply too few to mark such a winding, unpredictable path. You walk and walk, your small legs aching, your stomach rumbling with an insistent, painful emptiness. The trees, once merely tall, begin to feel menacing. Their shadows stretch and twist into grotesque shapes, like the grasping claws of unseen monsters. Every rustle in the undergrowth makes you jump, your heart hammering against your ribs. You try to retrace your steps, remembering the direction you came from, but the forest is a labyrinth, a swirling vortex of sameness. Every tree looks identical, every patch of moss the same shade of green. You find yourself walking in circles, the same fallen log appearing again and again, a mocking landmark in your futile attempts. The sun dips lower, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a beautiful sight that only amplifies your growing terror. Night is coming, and with it, the true horrors of the woods. You press closer to Hansel, his small hand clutched tightly in yours. He's starting to whimper now, the bravado of the morning replaced by a child's raw fear. You try to be strong for him, to project an air of calm you don't feel. We'll be okay. Hansel. You murmur, the words tasting like ashes in your mouth. We just need to find a good place to sleep. But where's a good place? Every shadow seems to hold a pair of glowing eyes. Every snap of a twig sounds like a hungry predator. You huddle together under the sprawling roots of an ancient oak, its massive trunk offering a semblance of shelter. The air grows colder, a damp chill that seeps through your thin clothes. You shiver, not just from the cold, but from the creeping dread that has taken root in your heart. The sounds of the forest intensify after dark, the hooting of an owl, the distant howl of what could be a wolf, the rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush. Your imagination, fueled by hunger and fear, conjures up images of beasts with gnashing teeth and glowing eyes. Sleep is a restless, fitful thing. Every creak of the tree, every whisper of the wind, jolts you awake. You dream of food, of warmth, of your own bed, only to wake to the harsh reality of the cold, hard earth beneath you and the looming darkness above. You remember a story your grandmother used to tell, about the forest spirits that wander after dusk, mischievous and sometimes malevolent. You squeeze your eyes shut, trying to banish the images, trying to find some comfort in the shared warmth of Hansel's small body. As dawn breaks, a thin, watery light filters through the leaves, bringing with it a sliver of hope. You stand, stiff and sore, your stomach aching with a hunger so profound it feels like a physical pain. Hansel is quiet, his face pale and smudged with dirt, his eyes wide with a fear that mirrors your own. You know, instinctively, that you can't stay here. Staying means starving, means succumbing to the cold or to whatever predatory creatures roam these ancient woods. You begin to walk again, aimlessly at first, just putting one foot in front of the other. The trees remain endless, indifferent. You try to remember the stories your father told, about finding true north by the moss on the trees, but every tree seems to have moss on every side. You recall a common historical belief that forests were places of primal chaos, often associated with outlaws, mythical beasts, and dangerous spirits, serving as a stark contrast to the ordered world of human settlements. This idea of the wild forest as a dangerous, untamed space, a place where civilization's rules didn't apply, was deeply ingrained in the collective consciousness of the time, and you feel it now, this primal fear, this sense of being utterly alone in a world that doesn't care if you live or die. Hours turn into what feels like an eternity. Your throat is parched, your lips cracked. Every step is an effort. Your legs feeling heavy as lead. Hansel, once full of youthful energy, now trudges beside you, his head bowed, his small hand still clinging to yours. You try to distract him, to distract yourself, by humming a tune, a simple nursery rhyme that feels utterly out of place in this grim landscape, but the words catch in your throat. Lost to the suffocating silence of the forest, you're starting to see things now, or perhaps you're just desperately hungry. The shadows seem to dance, twisting into shapes that aren't there. A fallen branch becomes a lurking beast, a patch of sunlight a shimmering mirage of water. You stumble, your ankle twisting painfully, but you force yourself up, driven by an instinct for survival that runs deeper than any pain. You have to keep moving, you have to find something, just when despair threatens to swallow you whole. Just as the last vestiges of hope begin to flicker, you catch a scent, faint at first, carried on a gentle breeze, then growing stronger. It's sweet, impossibly sweet, a smell that makes your mouth water and your stomach clench with an almost unbearable intensity. It's not the smell of pine or damp earth, it's the smell of something cooked, something delicious, something that makes every fibre of your being scream for sustenance. It's the scent of gingerbread. You follow it, dragging Hansel along, your pace quickening despite your exhaustion. The scent is a beacon, a promise, an almost mystical lure in the desolate wilderness. You push through thickets of thorny bushes, ignore the scratches on your arms and legs. You scramble over fallen logs, driven by that intoxicating aroma. It's a smell that speaks of warmth, of safety, of everything you've lost and everything you desperately crave. And then, through a clearing in the trees, you see it. Not a grand castle, not a humble cabin, but something far more fantastical. Something that seems plucked from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. It's a house. Yes, but unlike any house you've ever seen, its walls shimmer with what looks like polished, golden brown gingerbread. Its roof is thick with frosting, gleaming white and tempting. Windows are panes of spun sugar, and the eaves drip with candied fruit, glittering like jewels in the dim light. Tiny, colourful candies are dotted across its surface, like sprinkles on a giant confection. Hansel gasps beside you, a small, weak sound of wonder and disbelief. His eyes, once dull with fear, now sparkle with an almost childlike joy. You, however, feel a prickle of unease. It's too perfect, too whimsical, too... There, in the middle of this dark, unforgiving forest, a house made of sweets seems utterly out of place, almost an affront to the harsh reality you've been living. This sudden appearance of an impossibly lavish dwelling in a desolate wilderness is a classic trope in folklore, often signifying either a magical boon or a dangerous, deceptive trap. It's the kind of fantastical detail that often signals a shift in the narrative, a descent from mundane hardship into something far more extraordinary, and potentially far more perilous. But the hunger, oh, the hunger is a ravenous beast, clawing at your insides. It overrides the subtle whispers of caution, silences the little voice in your head that says this isn't right. The smell is too potent, too inviting. It promises relief, salvation. You stumble forward, Hansel already pulling free of your grasp, his eyes fixed on the sugary walls. He breaks off a piece of the gingerbread from the corner of the house, stuffing it into his mouth with an almost frantic desperation. The crunch of it, the sweet, spicy taste, is a revelation. It's better than anything you've ever tasted. A burst of flavour that momentarily banishes the cold and the fear. You follow his lead, tearing off a piece of the sugary roof, your fingers sticky with frosting. The sweetness explodes on your tongue, a shock of pure delight after days of gnawing emptiness. It's a moment of unadulterated pleasure, a brief respite from the relentless misery. You eat, and eat, and eat until your stomach, once painfully empty, feels distended, almost nauseatingly full. Hansel, too, is gorging himself, crumbs clinging to his face, a look of pure, blissful contentment on his features. As you stand there, devouring the house, a voice, reedy and thin, calls out from within, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" It's a sing-song voice, deceptively sweet, but something in its tone sends a chill down your spine, a cold sensation that has nothing to do with the cool forest air. Hansel, still absorbed in his sugary feast, barely registers it, but you look up, your mouth full of gingerbread, and a new kind of fear begins to bloom in your chest. The house, once a beacon of hope, now feels like a spider's web, and you, a very hungry fly, have just wandered into its sticky embrace. You freeze, a piece of glistening sugar-coated roof still clutched in your sticky fingers. The voice again, closer this time, and a door creaks open. It's a small, wooden door, almost hidden by the cascade of candies and frosting that adorns the house, and then she appears, not the kindly old grandmother you might have hoped for, not even a stern but benevolent figure. No, this woman is an anomaly. She is bent with age, her back a perpetual question mark, but there's a wiry strength in her movements, a predatory grace that belies her apparent frailty. Her face is a road map of wrinkles, etched deep like ancient riverbeds, and her eyes, small and beady, dart between you and Hansel with an unsettling intensity. They are too bright, too sharp for someone so old, gleaming with an almost feverish hunger that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand on end. Well, what have we here?" she croaks, her voice like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones. She smells not of gingerbread and sugar, as the house does, but of something earthy, something old, and a faint, cloying sweetness that you can't quite place, but that somehow makes your stomach churn despite the feast you've just consumed. You want to run, to bolt back into the relative safety of the dark, indifferent forest, but your legs feel like lead, rooted to the spot by a potent cocktail of fear and the lingering allure of the sugary paradise you've just sampled. Hansel, bless his innocent heart, is still chewing blissfully, oblivious to the subtle shift in the air, the deepening chill that has nothing to do with the forest's embrace. "Dear children," she continues, a smile stretching her thin lips, revealing teeth that are a little too long, a little too sharp. "You must be hungry, lost. Come in. Don't be shy." The invitation is laced with an insidious warmth, like honey coated in arsenic. You glance at Hansel, who, now having swallowed his mouthful, looks up at her with wide, trusting eyes. His stomach is full, the immediate agony of hunger assuaged, and in his childlike simplicity, the immediate threat seems to have vanished. He takes a tentative step forward. You, however, hesitate. There's something about her, something in her eyes, in the way she scrutinizes you both, that screams danger. It's a primal instinct, a tiny flickering flame of warning in the back of your mind. But what choice do you have? The forest is dark, cold, and potentially teeming with unseen threats. Here, there is light, warmth, and the lingering promise of food. Historical records from the medieval period, particularly during times of widespread hardship, often detail stories of children falling victim to various dangers, including predation by humans or wild animals. Once separated from their communities, the dangers outside her door, though unseen, are very real. You choose the devil you can see, or at least the one offering a warm hearth. You step inside, Hansel eagerly trailing behind her. The interior of the house is deceptively cozy. A large fireplace crackles merrily in one corner, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air is thick with the sweet smell of baking. intermingled with something vaguely meaty, though you quickly push that thought away. There's a sturdy wooden table laden with more food than you've seen in weeks, loaves of dark bread, steaming bowls of porridge, rich milk in ceramic pitchers, and yes, even more cakes and pastries. Your empty stomach gives a pathetic whimper of complaint, overriding your lingering suspicions. Sit, my dears, she insists, her voice softer now, almost soothing. She gestures towards 2 small chairs pulled up to the table. You sit, Hansel already reaching for a warm piece of bread. You watch her, however, not truly relaxing. She moves with a strange efficiency, clearing away imaginary dust, her eyes constantly flicking towards you, assessing, calculating. You notice small, unusual details, a strange collection of oddly shaped bones hanging from a beam, what looks like a spinning wheel made from an unfamiliar, dark wood, and a large, heavy oven in the corner that seems to emanate an unnatural heat, even when no fire is visible within. You must be tired, she says, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Poor dears, all alone in the big, dark woods. Her words are laced with a saccharine sympathy that makes your skin crawl. She insists you eat more, pressing bowls of creamy porridge into your hands, urging you to drink the rich milk. And you do. You eat until you feel sick, until your body, starved for so long, protests the sudden onslaught of nourishment. It's a feast, a glorious, overwhelming feast, and for a brief, blissful moment, you allow yourself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, you've found salvation. She shows you to a small room, separate from the main living area. It's tiny, just big enough for 2 rough cots with straw mattresses, but it's clean, and there are thick wool blankets, the simple comfort of it, after nights spent shivering on the cold forest floor, is almost overwhelming. Sleep now, my little lambs, she coos, her voice echoing strangely in the small room. You are safe here. And then she closes the door, not quite locking it, but the heavy thud of the latch is unsettling. You lie on the cot, the unfamiliar softness beneath you, the warmth of the blankets a luxurious sensation. Hansel is already breathing deeply, lost in the oblivion of sleep. But you can't sleep. The image of her eyes, those sharp, predatory eyes, is burned into your mind. You listen, straining your ears, and you hear her moving about in the main room, the clinking of pots, a low hum that might be a song, or perhaps just the sounds of an old woman going about her chores. But then, you hear something else, a rhythmic thumping, a dull, repetitive sound that seems to come from the direction of the large, strange oven. It's an unsettling sound, and your imagination, already overactive, conjures up disturbing images. The next morning, the hospitality continues. More food, more warmth, but the undertone of unease only grows stronger. The old woman, she calls herself the Forest Mother, constantly watches you. Her compliments are laced with an odd emphasis on your plumpness, on Hansel's rosy cheeks. My, how quickly you're filling out, she exclaims, pinching Hansel's arm with surprising strength. He giggles, thinking it's a game, but you see the calculating gleam in her eyes. It's not admiration, it's assessment. She's not looking at you as children, she's looking at you as livestock. She begins to make you work, not difficult labour, not at first, just small chores, sweeping the floor, gathering kindling, helping her knead dough. But even these simple tasks are accompanied by her constant scrutiny. She meticulously measures your portions of food, always generous, almost too generous. Yet her eyes linger on your growing bellies. You notice she never seems to eat much herself, just sips from a strange, dark brew. The practice of fattening up livestock for slaughter was, of course, a common agricultural method in pre-industrial societies, and this detail would have resonated deeply with an audience familiar with the harsh realities of rural life. It's a chilling historical parallel. Applied to you, days blur into a monotonous cycle of eating and light chores, all under her watchful, unsettling gaze. Hansel, perhaps more resilient or simply more naive, seems to adjust. He plays with the few wooden toys she has, finds amusement in chasing the scruffy cat that sometimes wanders into the cottage. But you feel the walls closing in, the cosy cabin, once a sanctuary, now feels like a cage. You start to notice how far away the nearest village feels, how impenetrable the forest seems from her windows. There are no other tracks leading to or from the house, no signs of other human presence. It's as if this house and this old woman exist in a pocket dimension, isolated and self-contained. One morning, she calls Hansel to her. "Come here, my little dumpling," she says, her voice sickly sweet. "Let me feel your arm." Hansel, accustomed to her odd habits, dutifully extends his arm. She pinches his skin, her long bony fingers surprisingly strong. "Still so thin," she laments, shaking her head. "We must feed you more." Hansel looks confused. But you understand with a sickening certainty that makes your blood run cold. She isn't just an eccentric old woman, she's a witch, and you and Hansel are not her guests, you are her next meal. The realization hits you like a physical blow, knocking the breath from your lungs. It's a moment of chilling clarity. The gingerbread house, the excessive food, the constant checking of your weight, it all snaps into place, forming a terrifying picture. You recall the old stories, whispered by the village elders around crackling fires, of witches who lured lost children with promises of warmth and food, only to devour them. The detail of the gingerbread house itself is a common motif, a lure that appeals to the innocent and the desperate. It's a classic example of the deceptive nature of apparent abundance in a world of scarcity, a psychological trap designed to exploit fundamental human needs. From that moment on, every bite of food feels like a poisoned morsel. Every kind word from her feels like a lie. You become acutely aware of the large oven in the corner, its presence now menacing, its purpose terrifyingly clear. You remember the low thumping sound you heard that first night, and a wave of nausea washes over you. What was it? The sound of her preparing the oven? Perhaps, or something else entirely. You try to catch Hansel's eye, to convey the urgency of the situation, but he just smiles, his mouth full of bread, still blissfully ignorant. You start to feign a loss of appetite, pushing food around on your plate, trying to eat less, to appear thinner. But she's cunning. She cajoles, she threatens, she insists. "Eat, child, eat. You'll never grow big and strong if you don't eat," she chides, her voice hardening. You try to argue, to say you're full, but she just laughs, a cackling sound that scrapes at your nerves. She even resorts to force-feeding you sometimes, holding the spoon to your lips until you swallow. Your stomach churns, but you know defiance could be worse. One day, she brings out a large wooden cage from a back room. It's sturdy, made of thick, rough-hewn timbers, and its door is secured with a heavy iron latch. Hansel looks at it with curiosity, but you know its purpose. "This is for Hansel, my dear," she says, her voice still sickeningly sweet. "He needs a special place to grow round and plump." She pushes Hansel gently towards it. He hesitates, confusion clouding his face. "Go on, little one," she urges. It's cozy, and Hansel, still too trusting, too naive, steps inside the moment he is fully in. She slams the door shut, the heavy latch falling into place with a definitive, chilling clunk. Hansel looks up, his eyes wide with sudden realization, with dawning terror. He rattles the bars, but they hold firm. "Gretel," he cries, his voice a panicked squeak. You stare at him, helpless, your own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. The witch cackles, a triumphant, chilling sound. Now, my little feast, you will truly fatten up. Your entire world narrows to the confines of this house, this cage. Hansel is imprisoned, forced to eat, forced to endure the witch's prodding and taunts. She feeds him constantly, bringing him the richest foods, the sweetest cakes, every morning. She demands he stick out his finger through the bars, her eyesight apparently failing due to her age. Let me feel how plump you are. My little morsel, she'd shriek. Hansel, in a desperate, last-ditch effort at cunning, would stick out a scrawny chicken bone he'd hidden under his straw mattress. It was a small act of defiance, a flickering ember of hope, but you knew it wouldn't last forever. You, meanwhile, are forced to continue with the chores, but now with an added intensity. She makes you fetch water, chop wood, clean her grotesque house from top to bottom. She scolds you constantly, her voice sharp and brittle. The fear for Hansel's life, and your own, becomes a constant, gnawing presence. You watch, listen, and learn, trying to find a weakness, an opportunity, anything to escape this living nightmare. The witch is old. Yes, but she is strong, and her cunning is far greater than your own. You are trapped, utterly, terribly trapped. The days inside the witch's house stretched into an agonizing blur, each one identical to the last, marked only by the escalating terror for Hansel. You live in a constant state of hyper-awareness, every nerve ending screaming a silent warning. The rich, sweet smell of the gingerbread house, once so enticing, now clings to everything like a cloying shroud, a sickening reminder of your captivity. It's a smell that promises death, not life. Every morning, the witch would hobble into Hansel's small, wooden cage, her beady eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Stick out your finger, little morsel, she'd shriek, her voice a rusty hinge. Hansel, bless his quick wit in the face of such terror, would dutifully extend the scrawny chicken bone he had managed to smuggle in and hide. You'd watch, your breath caught in your throat, as her gnarled fingers, surprisingly nimble, would feel along the bone, her brow furrowing in irritation. Still so thin. When will you ever get plump? She'd grumble, kicking at the cage in frustration. It was a reprieve, a small victory, but you knew it was temporary. Her patience was wearing thin, and her hunger, you could sense, was only growing. Your own existence was a relentless grind. She worked you from dawn till dusk, demanding that you sweep, scrub, fetch water from the well, and chop kindling. Your hands, once soft and small, were now raw and chafed, dotted with splinters. Your back ached constantly, a dull throb that never truly went away. The cottage, despite its sweet exterior, was a place of perpetual grime and strange, unsettling odours. You scrubbed at stains that wouldn't come out, remnants of something. You tried not to think about it. One afternoon, while you were meticulously scrubbing the perpetually greasy hearth, a sudden, sharp pain flared in your stomach. It wasn't just hunger anymore. It was a deep, cramping ache, a sign of severe malnutrition despite the occasional forced feedings. Your body was screaming for proper nutrients, for the simple, wholesome food of your village. But here, it was all rich. Fatty meats and sickly sweet pastries, designed, you realised with a fresh wave of horror, to rapidly pack on weight, not to sustain life. Historically, the composition of diets varied wildly based on region and class, but sustained consumption of high-fat, high-sugar foods without other vital nutrients could lead to rapid weight gain but also significant health issues, a fact likely understood through empirical observation, even if the science wasn't formal. Your body, though receiving calories, was still starving in a more fundamental way. You also noticed other peculiar habits of the witch. She never truly slept in a bed. instead often dozing in a large, uncomfortable-looking armchair by the fire. Her head lolled unnaturally. Her movements were always accompanied by a faint, rustling sound, like dry leaves, and when she walked, her feet seemed to barely touch the ground. You glimpsed her, occasionally tending to a strange, gnarled plant in a forgotten corner of the house, muttering to it in a language that sounded like twigs snapping in a storm. These were the subtle signs, the folklore elements that built the picture of a true witch, not merely a cruel old woman. Your mind, though weary, was constantly racing, desperately searching for a way out. You watched her, memorizing her routines, looking for any lapse in her vigilance. She seemed to possess an unnatural alertness, her beady eyes missing nothing. She would bark orders at you, her voice cutting through the stillness of the cottage like a knife. Faster. Girl, that fire won't keep itself. Or, don't just stand there. Polish that table until I can see my face in it. Her cruelty was calculated, designed to keep you subservient, exhausted and without hope. One evening, as you were setting the table for Hansel's forced meal, a grotesque array of rich puddings and fatty cuts of meat, you overheard her muttering to herself. She was by the enormous oven, running her hand over its cold, smooth surface. Soon, she whispered, her voice a low, raspy purr. Soon, my little Hansel, you will be perfect. Your blood ran cold. The finality in her voice, the almost sensual way she touched the oven, left no doubt. The chicken bone trick wouldn't work much longer. The next morning, her patience finally snapped. She stormed into Hansel's cage room, bypassing his outstretched finger. Her eyes, usually just sharp, now blazed with a manic intensity. Enough of this pretense, she shrieked, her voice rising to a crescendo. You are plump enough, more than enough. Hansel, huddled in the corner of his cage, whimpered, his small face pale with terror. You stood frozen, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. This was it, the moment you had dreaded. Gretel, she barked, turning her attention to you. Her eyes narrowed to slits. Light the oven and fetch the water for the dough. He will be baked today. Her words hit you like a physical blow. Baked. Not just cooked, but baked. A horrifying, visceral image of Hansel, transformed into a meal, flashed before your eyes. You felt a wave of nausea, your stomach churning violently. Your hands trembled as you approached the massive, dark oven. It felt cold, ancient and utterly terrifying. You had seen her light it before, with a strange, almost ritualistic ceremony, but you had never had to do it yourself. It was a huge brick-lined cavity, big enough, you realized with a sickening jolt, to fit a child or two. You fumbled with the kindling, your fingers clumsy with fear. The witch stood over you, her shadow looming, her breath hot on your neck. Hurry! Girl, do you want him to starve before he's even cooked? She snarled, her voice laced with impatience. You tried to focus, to remember how she did it. You pushed the dry twigs into the maw of the oven, then added larger pieces of wood. You struck the flint, sparks showering uselessly. Your hands were shaking too much. Foolish girl, she shrieked, grabbing your arm with surprising strength. Her grip was like iron, her nails digging into your skin. Let me show you how it's done. She shoved you roughly aside. You stumbled back, hitting the cold stone floor, your head rattling against the hard surface. A sharp pain shot through your scalp, but you barely registered it. Your eyes were fixed on her as she leaned into the oven, her face illuminated by the flickering sparks from the kindling. You need to make sure the fire is hot, she cackled, her voice echoing oddly in the cavernous oven. Hot enough to bake properly. You see, not just a little fire, but a roaring inferno, she demonstrated, thrusting a large wooden paddle into the oven, pushing the kindling further back, arranging the logs to create an optimal draft. Her head and shoulders were already halfway inside the opening, her focus entirely on the burgeoning flames. This was it. Your chance. A thought. Sharp and clear. Cut through the fog of your terror. It was now or never. You had to be brave. Not just for yourself, but for Hansel. You had to be as cunning as she was cruel. This was your one. Desperate window of opportunity. This moment, where the victim turns the predator's own tools or methods against them, is a timeless narrative device found across countless myths and legends, highlighting the triumph of wit over brute force. I don't understand, you stammered, feigning even greater fear and confusion. How do I know if it's hot enough? How do I tell if the bread is ready? Do I put my head inside like you are? You made your voice sound small, scared, utterly helpless, the perfect picture of a clueless child. You knew your life, and Hansel's, depended on this performance. She paused, her head still partially in the oven, and let out a derisive snort. Of course not. You silly goose. You just stick your head in and check the heat, like this. She pulled her head out for a moment, her eyes glinting, eager to demonstrate her superior knowledge, to show off her expertise. It was her undoing, her vanity, her overconfidence, blinded her to your true intentions. See, she said, bending back down, her head once more disappearing into the dark maw of the oven. Just lean in. Feel the heat. Like this. Her voice trailed off, muffled by the brick. Her back was to you. Her frail, bent figure silhouetted against the growing orange glow from within the oven. She was completely vulnerable, utterly focused on her perverse demonstration. This was your chance, a desperate, terrifying, singular chance. Every instinct screamed at you to run, to flee, but you knew you couldn't leave Hansel. You couldn't. You had to be strong. You had to be quick, with a surge of adrenaline that lent your small body unnatural strength. You pushed. You pushed with all your might. A guttural cry escaping your lips. Your hands, raw and aching, found purchase on her bony shoulders. You shoved, grunting with effort, not allowing yourself to think, to hesitate. She let out a startled squawk, a choked sound of surprise and outrage, her balance instantly lost. Her legs flailed for a moment, kicking at the air, her worn tattered skirt brushing against your face. Then, with a sickening thud and a terrified shriek, she toppled forward, tumbling headfirst into the blazing inferno of her own oven. The heat, intense and immediate, must have enveloped her instantly. There was a brief, horrifying sizzle, a smell of singed hair and something else, something indescribably foul. Then silence, a terrible, absolute silence, broken only by the crackling of the flames. You stumbled back, gasping for breath, your body trembling uncontrollably, your mind, reeling from the sheer enormity of what you had just done, struggled to process it. The witch was gone, consumed by her own trap. The air in the room, already hot from the oven, seemed to crackle with an unnatural energy. You stared at the oven door, half open, revealing the raging fire within, and the faint, acrid smoke that now curled upwards. A sense of morbid triumph, mixed with profound shock and horror, washed over you. Your legs felt like jelly, but you forced yourself to move. Hansel. You had to get Hansel. You stumbled towards his cage, fumbling with the heavy iron latch, your fingers clumsy and stiff. It was rusted, stubborn, a testament to its secure design. You pulled, pushed, grunted with effort, tears of frustration stinging your eyes. Finally, with a loud groan of metal, the latch gave way. You yanked open the cage door. Hansel, pale and trembling, scrambled out, his eyes wide with fear and a dawning understanding. He looked at you, then at the oven, then back at you. A silent question in his gaze. You simply wrapped your arms around him, pulling him into a tight embrace, burying your face in his hair. He clung to you, his small body shaking, a silent sob racking his frame. You stood there for a long moment, clinging to each other, the warmth of the fire from the oven a grotesque parody of comfort. The cottage, once a prison, was now empty, silent. The sweet smell of gingerbread was still there, but now it was tainted, irrevocably linked with the memory of terror and the chilling demise of its owner. The silence was deafening. The oppressive weight of the witch's presence lifted, replaced by an eerie stillness. You knew you couldn't stay. Not another moment. The house, for all its material comforts, was still a tomb. You had to get out. You had to get home, but home felt impossibly far away. A distant memory almost as hazy as the one of your parents. You had faced one monster. Now you had to face the wilderness again, armed only with your wits and the horrifying memory of what you had just endured. The true challenge of survival, you knew, was still ahead. The sudden silence in the gingerbread house was more chilling than any of the witch's cackles. The roaring fire in the oven, once a terrifying symbol of her power, now seemed to mock you, devouring her in a macabre reversal of fate. Hansel, still clinging to you, felt impossibly small and vulnerable. His soft whimpers against your chest were the only sound, cutting through the eerie stillness that had descended upon the cottage. The lingering scent of burnt sugar and something acrid, indescribable, hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the horrific deed you had just committed. Your hands still throbbed from the exertion of the push, and a cold dread, deeper than any hunger, settled into your bones. You knew you couldn't stay. Not another moment. This house, for all its deceptive sweetness, was a tomb, tainted by unspeakable acts, and now, by your own desperate violence. The silence, once a longed-for escape from her incessant demands, now felt suffocating, filled with echoes of your recent terror. You had to get out, and you had to get out now. Come on, Hansel, you whispered, your voice hoarse, barely audible. You gently pulled him away, your gaze sweeping frantically around the main room. What did you need? What was truly important? Food, yes, but not the rich, cloying pastries, something that would sustain you on the journey back through the unforgiving forest. And money, if there was any. The witch had lived a life of strange luxury here. Surely there must be something of value. Your eyes fell on a large, heavy chest in a corner, half hidden by a threadbare tapestry depicting fantastical creatures. It was made of dark, aged wood, studded with rusty iron bands. Your heart pounded with a mix of fear and desperate hope. Could it be? Could it hold something useful? You dragged Hansel with you, his small body still trembling, his eyes wide and unfocused. With a grunt of effort, you lifted the heavy, ornate lid. Inside, glimmering faintly in the dim light, was a breathtaking sight. Gold, not just a few coins, but a cascade of them, piled high, glinting like scattered sunshine. There were also strings of pearls, their milky luster almost ethereal and small, precious stones that caught the light, sparkling with hidden fire. It was a treasure beyond anything you had ever imagined, far more than the meagre savings of your entire village. The inclusion of found treasure in witch tales often served a dual purpose: to provide a tangible reward for overcoming evil, but also to represent the ill-gotten gains of the malevolent figure, reinforcing moral lessons about greed and corruption. Hansel gasped, his small hand reaching out instinctively, his fear momentarily forgotten in the face of such overwhelming riches. You, too, felt a surge of avarice, a primitive desire to claim it all. This was enough to live on, to never be hungry again, to ensure that you and Hansel would never face abandonment again. But you couldn't carry it all. It was too heavy, too much for your small frames. You quickly began to stuff as many gold coins as you could into your pockets, the heavy metallic discs pressing uncomfortably against your thighs. You found a small, rough linen bag, probably used for flour, and crammed it full of pearls and a handful of the largest, most iridescent gemstones. Hansel, recovering quickly, began to do the same, his small fingers fumbling with the coins, his eyes bright with childlike wonder. He even managed to grab a handful of what looked like silver spoons, though you quickly dissuaded him from anything too cumbersome. No more. Hansel, you urged, pulling him away from the overflowing chest. We need to go. Now. You slung the heavy bag over your shoulder, the weight of it surprisingly comforting. It was security, a promise of a future, before you left. You hesitated. Your eyes fell upon the simmering cauldron on the hearth, untouched from the witch's last meal. It contained a thick, dark stew, its aroma now repulsive, but next to it sat a half-eaten loaf of dark, dense bread and a pitcher of water. Practicality, overriding revulsion, took over. You grabbed the bread, pushing it into Hansel's hands, and took a long, desperate drink from the pitcher, the cool water a balm to your parched throat. This food was untainted by the witch's magic, just simple, nourishing fare. You took one last look around the cottage, a final farewell to the nightmare. The flickering light from the oven cast long, dancing shadows, making the familiar objects seem monstrous. You shuddered, then turned, pulling Hansel by the hand. You pushed open the heavy wooden door, the one you had entered with such desperate hope what felt like an eternity ago. The cool, damp air of the forest washed over you, a welcome contrast to the oppressive heat and stench of the house. Stepping out. The vastness of the woods was immediate and overwhelming. The trees loomed, their branches still intertwined like giant, skeletal fingers, but this time they didn't feel quite as menacing. They were simply trees, part of a natural world you understood, a world less terrifying than the one you had just left. The sun was already high in the sky, dappling the forest floor with patches of light, illuminating the winding, moss-covered paths. Which way? Gretel, Hansel whispered, his voice small, his eyes still wide with a residue of fear. He looked to you for direction, for guidance. You were the older one, the one who had just faced down a witch. You had to know, but you didn't. You had no idea. The forest was still a bewildering maze. You had fled in terror, driven by instinct, not by any sense of direction. You remembered the breadcrumbs, the pebbles, all useless. How do you find your way home when you have no idea which way is home? You took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of your heart. You closed your eyes for a moment, trying to recall snippets of conversations, the direction of the sun when you first entered the forest. Anything. You remembered your father had mentioned the great oak, a landmark he used when venturing deep for timber. But how great was great, and where was it? Navigational skills in pre-modern times were highly localized and often reliant on intimate knowledge of the immediate environment, making long-distance, unplanned journeys through dense wilderness incredibly perilous for those without extensive experience. Your reliance on such vague markers highlighted the almost insurmountable odds you faced. You decided to follow the sun. It was setting, which meant you were generally heading west. Your village, you vaguely recalled, was to the east of where you were abandoned. That meant you had to turn around, to go back the way you thought you came. But then veer north or south, it was all a confusing mess. The fear of getting utterly lost again, or worse, stumbling into another trap, was a cold knot in your stomach. We go this way, you declared, pointing vaguely towards the rising sun, the opposite direction from which you had first arrived at the witch's house. It was a guess, a desperate gamble, but you had to project certainty for Hansel. He was looking to you, trusting you. You couldn't let him down. You walked and walked. The forest floor was uneven, covered in tangled roots and slippery moss. The heavy bag of gold and jewels swung awkwardly against your side, a constant reminder of both your fortune and your predicament. Hansel, though he had eaten, was still weak, and his steps lagged. You often had to pull him along, encouraging him, distracting him with whispered promises of home, of warmth, of safety. The hours wore on. The sun, once your guide, climbed higher, baking the forest floor, making the air humid and still. The delicious bread you had grabbed from the witch's cottage quickly disappeared, consumed in frantic bites. Thirst became a gnawing problem. You scanned the ground frantically for any sign of a stream, a puddle, anything. You remembered your father talking about tracking animal paths to water sources, but you saw no discernible trails, just endless trees. You imagined the cool, clear water of the village well, the feeling of it slaking your thirst, and the thought spurred you onward. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made you jump. The forest, though no longer home to the immediate threat of the witch, still held its own dangers. You thought of wolves, of bears, of other lost souls who had succumbed to the wilderness. You tried to remember the warning calls of birds, the signs of safe berries versus poisonous ones, but your mind was a jumbled mess of fear and exhaustion. One peculiar detail, a recurring element that bothered you, was the overwhelming silence of the forest. Where were the chirping birds, the chattering squirrels? It was almost as if the witch's presence had somehow warped the natural world around her house, silencing the normal sounds of life. Even now, far from her abode, an unnatural stillness seemed to cling to the air, making every sound you did hear, a distant hoot, a rustle, seem amplified and sinister. Folklore often imbues places of powerful magic, particularly dark magic, with an unnatural quality, such as an eerie silence or the absence of wildlife, indicating a disruption of the natural order. This quiet oppression only added to your unease. By late afternoon, despair began to set in again. You had been walking for what felt like an eternity, and the trees still stretched endlessly in every direction. The sun, now beginning its slow descent, cast long, distorted shadows that danced and swayed, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous figures. Hansel was crying again, his small, exhausted body refusing to go any further. He collapsed onto a bed of moss, sobbing inconsolably. "I can't. Gretel, I can't go on," he wailed, his voice raw with despair. You felt your own strength draining, your own hope flickering. You knelt beside him, wrapping your arms around his shaking form. You wanted to cry too, to succumb to the exhaustion and the overwhelming hopelessness, but you couldn't. You were all Hansel had. "We have to, Hansel," you whispered, though your voice cracked. "We have to go home." You pulled out a few gold coins from your pocket, letting them glint in the fading sunlight. "Look, we're rich. We'll buy a big house and food, and you'll never be hungry again." It was a desperate plea, a fragile promise, but it seemed to pierce through his despair, if only for a moment. He looked at the shining coins, his sobs subsiding into hiccoughs. You sat there for a while, letting him rest, letting your own aching muscles recover. You tried to think, to plan. You needed water. You needed to find some kind of path. The forest seemed to be actively working against you, a living, breathing entity determined to keep you lost. You remembered stories your father told of travellers being led astray by mischievous spirits, or of paths that simply disappeared. It felt like that now, as if the very ground beneath your feet conspired against your return. As dusk began to paint the sky in the hues of purple and deep orange, a new fear began to creep in. The creatures of the night. You had been lucky so far, but your luck wouldn't hold forever. You needed shelter, and quickly. You spotted a large, ancient tree in the distance, its trunk impossibly wide, its branches spreading like an enormous umbrella. It wasn't the great oak, but it was big enough to offer some cover. You roused Hansel, half carrying him towards it, driven by the urgency of the encroaching darkness. You huddled together at its base, the rough bark a cold comfort against your backs. The air grew colder, and the familiar chorus of night sounds began: the hoot of an owl, the rustling of unseen creatures, the whisper of the wind through the leaves. Your grip on Hansel's hand tightened, your eyes darting nervously into the inky blackness. You closed your eyes, trying to conjure the image of your village, the comforting glow of its hearths, the familiar faces. It felt impossibly far away, a dream from another life. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and shallow, punctuated by dreams of dark forests and cackling witches. The weight of the gold in your pocket was a tangible presence, a promise, and a burden. But right now, it offered no warmth, no comfort, no direction. You were still lost, still alone, and the path home seemed to stretch into an endless, terrifying unknown. The morning after your desperate escape from the witch's house dawned grey and unforgiving. You awoke stiff and disoriented, the ache in your muscles a dull throb. Hansel was still asleep, curled into a tight ball beside you, his face pale and tear-stained. The gold in your pocket, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a dead weight, cold and useless against the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. It couldn't buy you warmth, or water, or a clear path out of this endless, green labyrinth. You pushed yourself up, your eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. The trees were still identical, still indifferent. You picked a direction at random, a faint sense of a ridgeline to the east serving as your only, flimsy guide. We have to keep moving, Hansel, you urged, gently shaking him awake. His eyes fluttered open, dull with exhaustion and lingering fear. He looked at you, then at the vast, silent forest, and a fresh wave of despair washed over his small face. The walk was grueling. The golden coins clinked softly with every step, a constant, ironic reminder of your wealth in this land of scarcity. You stumbled over roots, your thin shoes offering little protection against the sharp stones and thorns. Hansel lagged behind, whimpering, his small legs burning with fatigue. You kept him going with whispered promises, not of candy houses anymore, but of warm beds, of hearty stew, of your mother's comforting embrace, though a part of you knew that embrace was now a distant memory, replaced by the chilling reality of abandonment. The sun, as it climbed higher, brought with it a suffocating humidity. The air grew thick, still, and heavy. Your throat felt like sandpaper, and your tongue clung to the roof of your mouth. Thirst, more than hunger, became your tormentor. You imagined trickling streams, cool, clear springs, but all you found were stagnant puddles, thick with algae and buzzing with insects. You dared not drink from them, remembering stories of sickness from tainted water. Historically, access to clean drinking water was a constant challenge, and contaminated sources were a major cause of disease, particularly for vulnerable populations like those journeying through the wilderness. This wasn't just a fairy tale thirst, it was a deadly historical reality. You tried to remember any lessons your father had taught you about finding water in the wild. He'd spoken of listening for the sound of running water, of looking for greener, denser vegetation. But the forest was a symphony of rustling leaves, and every patch of green seemed equally dense. You were too young, too inexperienced, to truly navigate this unforgiving wilderness. As the day wore on, hunger, though less immediately urgent than thirst, began to assert itself. Your stomach growled, a hollow, echoing sound in the quiet forest. You scanned the trees for berries, for anything edible, but fear of poisonous plants kept you from sampling anything unfamiliar. Every berry, every mushroom, could be a trap, just as sweet and deceptive as the gingerbread house. You stumbled upon a small, muddy game trail, barely discernible from the surrounding undergrowth. It was narrow, winding, clearly used by animals. Maybe it leads to water, you murmured, more to yourself than to Hansel, who was slumped against a tree trunk, barely conscious, with renewed desperate hope. You began to follow it. The trail led deeper into a tangled thicket, the branches grabbing at your clothes, scratching your exposed skin. You pressed on, driven by a raw, primal instinct to survive. Hansel, roused by a fresh surge of fear from something unseen rustling in the bushes, found a burst of adrenaline and managed to keep up. The trail wound relentlessly, seemingly without end. The light began to fade, casting the forest in long, ominous shadows. The silence, once so unsettling, was now broken by the increasing sounds of the forest at night, the hooting of an owl, the distant cry of an unknown animal. Each sound sent a fresh jolt of fear through you, just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into a deep, impenetrable gloom. You heard it, the unmistakable sound of flowing water. It was faint at first, a whisper, then growing stronger, a murmuring promise. You pushed through the final few branches, stumbling out into a small clearing. There it was, a narrow, winding stream, its water glinting faintly in the dying light. It wasn't a roaring river, but it was clear, sparkling, and utterly beautiful. You collapsed on your knees at its bank, Hansel right beside you, and plunged your hands into the cool water. It was icy, invigorating. You cupped your hands, bringing the water to your lips, and drank deeply, greedily, until your thirst was finally, blessedly, quenched. Hansel drank too, splashing his face, a small, weary sigh escaping his lips. The relief was overwhelming, a wave of pure, unadulterated gratitude. You splashed your face, washed the dirt from your arms, feeling a sliver of your energy return. But even as you celebrated this small victory, the knowledge of your continued peril lingered. Water was found, but you were still lost. You decided to spend the night by the stream. It felt safer, somehow, than the deep, silent woods. You gathered what little dry leaves and twigs you could find, hoping to build a small fire. But the wood was too damp, your skills too rudimentary. The cold crept in as darkness deepened, a pervasive chill that seeped into your bones. You huddled together, shivering, relying on each other for warmth. The sounds of the night seemed to intensify by the water's edge, the unseen creatures coming closer, their rustlings and splashes magnified in the stillness. You thought of the witch, of her fate in the oven. A part of you felt a chilling satisfaction, a primitive triumph. But another part, a larger part, was simply numb with shock. You were just children, forced into an act of unimaginable violence to survive. Would you ever be free of the memory? Would the gold, earned in such a horrific way, truly bring you peace? The moral implications of justifiable violence, particularly when committed by children in extreme circumstances, were complex and debated even in historical folk narratives, reflecting a society grappling with harsh realities. This wasn't a clean victory, it was a brutal survival. The night was long and cold. You slept fitfully, disturbed by the unfamiliar sounds and the ever-present chill. Dreams were a swirling chaos of gingerbread and fire, of your father's retreating back, of the witch's cackle echoing in the dark. When dawn finally broke, painting the eastern sky in soft hues of rose and gold, you felt a renewed sense of urgency. You had to move. You couldn't stay by the stream forever. You needed to find a path, a road, any sign of human habitation. You splashed water on your face, shaking Hansel awake. "We follow the stream." "Hansel," you declared, pointing downstream. "Streams always lead to bigger rivers, and rivers lead to towns." It was a theory, a hopeful guess, born from fragments of overheard conversations. It seemed logical, practical, the best hope you had. So, you began to follow the winding course of the stream. The walking was easier now, the ground flatter, less cluttered with dense undergrowth. The gentle murmur of the water was a comforting sound, a constant companion in the vast silence of the forest. The sun, as it rose higher, filtered through the canopy, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow on the water's surface. You kept your eyes peeled, not just for dangers, but for signs of life. A discarded piece of cloth, a footprint, a faint wisp of smoke, anything that would indicate another human being. The loneliness of the forest was oppressive, a suffocating silence that made you feel utterly insignificant. A lesser-known detail of historical forest travel is the psychological toll of prolonged isolation and the constant vigilance required against both natural and human threats, often leading to extreme paranoia and hallucinations. You found yourself talking to yourself, to Hansel, just to break the suffocating quiet. Hours passed. The stream widened, growing slightly deeper, its current becoming more noticeable. Small fish darted in the clear water, and occasionally you would glimpse a deer at the bank, its head raised, watchful. The sight of these wild creatures, living their lives untouched by human sorrow, brought a strange comfort. They were a reminder of a world that existed beyond your immediate terror. You were tired, so incredibly tired. Every muscle in your body screamed in protest. The gold in your pocket, though heavy, was no longer a burden, but a source of quiet determination. It was your ticket to a new life, a life where you would never be abandoned again. It was the driving force that pushed you forward, step after agonizing step. As the sun began its long descent towards the west, you noticed a subtle change in the landscape. The trees began to thin, and the undergrowth became less dense. The path, though still faint, felt more distinct. And then, through a break in the trees, you saw it. Not a house, not a village, but a single, winding track. It was rough, uneven, clearly not a main road, but it was unmistakably a path made by humans, by carts or by frequent foot traffic. Your heart leapt. Hope, bright and fierce, surged through you. "Hansel," you cried, your voice cracking with emotion, pointing with a trembling hand. "A path we found, a path." Hansel, who had been dragging his feet, looked up, his eyes widening. He saw it too. A small, weak smile touched his lips. You stumbled towards it, your legs burning, your lungs aching, but driven by an almost manic energy. You were no longer just walking, you were running, scrambling towards the promise of salvation. The stream, your faithful guide, veered off into the deeper woods, but the path was clear, beckoning you onward. You reached the path and fell to your knees, Hansel collapsing beside you. It was rough, uneven, but it was a path. It led somewhere. It led to people. It led, you desperately hoped, to home. The forest, though still vast, no longer felt like an impenetrable wall. You had found a crack, a lifeline, a way out of the darkness. The horrors of the gingerbread house, the terror of the witch, the brutal act you had committed, they were still fresh. Vivid scars. But now, for the first time since you were abandoned, you felt a glimmer of something else. Not joy, not yet, but hope. A fragile, precious hope that you might, just might, survive this after all. The rough, uneven path beneath your feet was a testament to human presence, a glorious promise of civilization after what felt like an eternity in the wild. Each step, though still aching, carried a renewed purpose. Hansel, too, seemed to find a reserve of strength. His small hand clutched tightly in yours as you trudged onward. The weight of the gold in your linen bag, once a burden, now felt like a reassuring anchor, a tangible symbol of your newfound freedom and the future it promised. The path wound through less dense woods, allowing slivers of sunlight to pierce through the canopy more frequently. You passed fallen trees, clearly cut by an axe, and patches of cleared undergrowth, signs that this was indeed a route used by woodcutters or trappers. You kept your eyes peeled, straining to catch any glimpse of human habitation, any wisp of smoke, any distant sound. The silence was still vast, but now it felt less oppressive, punctuated by the rustle of small animals in the bushes and the chirping of unseen birds. First, a relentless companion began to assert itself once more, The small stream you had followed now seemed a distant memory, and the path, though a clear improvement, offered no immediate water source. Your throat felt parched, your lips cracked and dry. You remembered the witch's strange bruise, the unsettling smells from her cauldron, and shuddered. You would rather endure the thirst than risk another tainted drop. In many historical accounts of survival, the ability to find and purify water was often the single most critical factor, far outweighing food availability in the short term, as dehydration could set in rapidly and be fatal. This practical reality was etched into your very being as the sun began to climb higher, casting longer shadows before you. Hansel stumbled. He fell to his knees, his small body trembling, his face pale and clammy. "I can't." "Gretel," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm so tired and thirsty." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't cry out, simply stared at you with a profound, quiet despair. You knelt beside him, your own exhaustion a heavy cloak. You pulled out a small, smooth river stone from your pocket, a memento from the stream, and pressed it into his hand. "Hold this, Hansel," you murmured. "It's cool. We'll find water soon. Just a little further." You tried to sound confident, to project a strength you didn't entirely feel. You knew cajoling wouldn't work forever. You rummaged through the small linen bag. Pushing aside the heavy gold coins and glittering jewels, you found a small, embroidered pouch, clearly overlooked in your hasty search of the chest. You opened it, and a wave of something unexpected washed over you, the sweet, comforting scent of dried fruit. Inside were a handful of plump, dried figs and some hard, dark pieces of dried meat. It was meagre, but it was sustenance, and it was untainted by the witch's sickening sweetness. "Look, Hansel," you exclaimed, pulling out a fig. Food, real food. You peeled a piece of the dried meat for him, tearing off a small piece of fig for yourself. The taste was heavenly, a burst of concentrated sweetness and savoury protein that immediately began to revive your flagging energy. It was a stark contrast to the saccharine richness of the witch's fare, and your body gratefully absorbed the wholesome nutrients. You made sure to ration it carefully. Knowing this small store was all you had, the path, though a lifeline, was still long and arduous. It twisted and turned, occasionally rising sharply over small hills, then dipping into damp, shadowy hollows. The trees, though less dense, still seemed to close in around you, obscuring any clear view of the horizon. You felt like you were walking inside an endless green tunnel, the outside world a distant, unattainable concept. You started to hallucinate from exhaustion and the subtle hum of fear that never quite left you. The rustling leaves became whispered words, the dappled sunlight shifting into patterns of eyes watching you. You found yourself humming old nursery rhymes, then catching yourself, remembering the witch's sing-song voice, and stopping abruptly. This mental torment, this constant battle against your own mind, was almost as exhausting as the physical journey. Periods of extreme stress and deprivation often lead to psychological effects like hallucinations or paranoia, which were likely common, if unrecorded, experiences for those enduring prolonged wilderness survival. Your mind, like your body, was under siege. Hours turned into an eternity. The sun, which had been your guide, began its slow, inevitable descent, casting the world in a warm, golden glow that quickly turned to ominous purple. Panic began to bubble up again. You couldn't spend another night in the open, not with the gold, not with Hansel so weak. You needed shelter. Just as despair threatened to swallow you whole, you noticed it, a faint, almost imperceptible column of smoke, rising thinly into the darkening sky. It was too distant to truly smell, but the sight of it, a clear sign of human activity, sent a jolt of electrifying hope through your weary body. Smoke. Hansel, look, smoke. You cried, pointing with a trembling hand. Hansel, too exhausted to respond, simply followed your gaze, his eyes widening with a flicker of understanding. With renewed vigour, you pushed on, scrambling over obstacles, ignoring the burning in your lungs and the screaming in your legs. The path grew slightly wider, more defined, and soon you heard it. The faint, rhythmic sound of an axe chopping wood. It was a simple sound, but it was the most beautiful music you had ever heard. It meant people. It meant safety. You stumbled through the last few meters of the path, bursting out into a small, rough clearing. There, a lone woodcutter, his back to you, swung his axe rhythmically, splitting logs with practiced ease. A crude lean-to, made of rough timbers and animal hides, served as his temporary shelter, and a small, well-tended fire crackled merrily in a stone ring beside it. The smell of wood smoke, so comforting and familiar, filled the air. The woodcutter was a burly man, his back broad, his movements strong and deliberate. He had a grizzled beard and wore simple, patched leather clothing. He paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, and as he turned, his eyes fell upon you and Hansel. His face, initially stern, softened with a look of profound surprise, then alarm. He dropped his axe with a dull thud. "Children," he boomed, his voice deep but kind. "What are you doing out here? Are you lost?" You could only nod, tears streaming down your face, a mix of relief and exhaustion. Hansel, seeing a friendly face, finally let out a choked sob and buried his face in your side. The woodcutter immediately moved towards you, his long strides covering the distance quickly. He knelt, his eyes scanning your weary faces, taking in your tattered clothes and the obvious signs of your ordeal. He saw the smudges of dirt, the fear in your eyes, the unnatural thinness of Hansel, despite his slightly distended belly. Woodcutters and other forest-dwelling individuals were often depicted in folklore as solitary, but occasionally benevolent figures, sometimes providing aid to lost travellers, a practical necessity in areas with limited infrastructure or communication. This encounter felt like a blessing. "Poor dears," he murmured, his voice laced with genuine sympathy. Come, you must be starving." He led you gently towards his small camp. He offered you his own meagre supper, some hard, smoked jerky and a piece of coarse, dark bread. It was simple fare, but it tasted like a feast. He poured you water from his leather water skin, clear and cool. You drank slowly this time, savouring each drop. He didn't ask many questions, sensing your trauma. He just let you eat, occasionally casting a worried glance at Hansel, who was devouring his portion with a frantic hunger that only a truly starved child could possess. You felt a wave of protective fierceness, instinctively hiding the heavy linen bag of gold and jewels behind your back. Under your cloak, you had faced one monster. You weren't about to tempt fate with another. The gold was your secret, your salvation, not something to be flaunted. As dusk deepened into night, the woodcutter offered you a place by his fire, beneath his lean-to. The warmth of the flames was a balm to your chilled bodies, and the rhythmic crackling was a comforting lullaby. He wrapped you both in a coarse woolen blanket, its rough texture a luxury after nights spent on the cold, damp earth. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, you felt truly safe. Hansel, exhausted beyond measure, fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost immediately, his head nestled against your shoulder. You, however, found sleep elusive. The horrors of the witch's house, the image of her falling into the oven, the terrifying journey through the forest, they replayed in your mind, a haunting endless loop. You listened to the woodcutter's gentle snores, the rustle of the leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. You were safe, for now, but the scars, both visible and invisible, would remain. You thought of your parents, of the abandonment. A bitter resentment simmered beneath the surface of your relief. They had cast you out, left you to die. This gold, this incredible fortune, was now yours. It was a tangible form of independence, a promise that you would never again be at the mercy of others' desperation. The concept of found wealth in folklore often served to rebalance social injustices, providing a means for the downtrodden to escape their circumstances, embodying a fantasy of poetic justice against those who inflict hardship. This treasure was not merely riches, it was freedom. You spent the night in a restless doze, clinging to Hansel, listening to the comforting sounds of the woodcutter's camp. The smell of wood smoke filled your nostrils, a comforting scent that replaced the cloying sweetness of gingerbread. When dawn finally arrived, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, you felt a renewed sense of purpose. You were still in the wilderness, but you were no longer alone, and you had a guide. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in days, it didn't feel entirely hopeless. You were closer to home, closer to a new beginning, armed with a terrifying experience and a hidden fortune. The woodcutter, a man of few words but profound kindness, proved to be an unexpected beacon in your relentless journey, as dawn painted the forest in soft hues of rose and gold. He stirred, stretching his powerful limbs. He offered you more of his smoked, jerky and coarse bread, urging you to eat your fill. His eyes, though weary, held a quiet concern that was almost as comforting as the food. "Where are you two from?" he finally asked, his voice low and gruff. As you shared the meagre breakfast, you hesitated, a knot of old fear tightening in your stomach. To tell him the truth, to admit your abandonment, felt like opening a fresh wound, but his gaze was steady, unwavering, filled with an honest curiosity that dispelled some of your apprehension. We got lost," you mumbled, choosing your words carefully. "From a village far to the east." You pointed vaguely, hoping he wouldn't press for more details. The lie felt flimsy, but it was better than the painful truth. Hansel, still half asleep and trusting, simply nodded, his mouth full of dried meat. The woodcutter hummed, stroking his grizzled beard. "East. You say that's a long way. This path, it leads to the great river, and from there, to the merchant towns further south." He paused, looking at you intently. "But if you're from the east, you'll want to head north from the river, then east again. It's a long journey by foot for little ones." His words were a road map, a lifeline. You clung to every syllable, mentally tracing the route, in times before accurate maps and widespread literacy. Oral directions and intimate knowledge of regional geography passed down through generations were crucial for travel and survival. His casual directions were invaluable. He packed a small parcel of jerky and bread for you, along with a skin of fresh water, refusing any payment. "Be careful," he warned, his eyes grave. "The forest can be cruel, and not all folk are as kind as they seem." It was a subtle acknowledgement, perhaps, of the dark things that could happen in the wilderness, or perhaps even a veiled reference to your true plight. But he didn't elaborate. You thanked him profusely, your voice thick with emotion. With renewed purpose, you set off, following the path as it widened slightly, becoming more of a well-trodden track. The woodcutter's directions were a powerful motivator, a tangible goal in the vast, confusing wilderness. You kept to the path, avoiding the dense woods, your eyes constantly scanning for landmarks, for anything that matched his descriptions. Hours melted into a monotonous cycle of walking, broken only by brief rests. The sun, a persistent orb in the sky, beat down relentlessly, making the air heavy and humid. Thirst returned, an insistent ache, but the woodcutter's water skin, though dwindling, provided precious relief. You made sure to ration it carefully, giving Hansel slightly more, his small body more vulnerable to dehydration. You practiced a small deception during your rests, a game to distract Hansel and to reinforce your secret. You would pull out a single, gleaming gold coin from your pocket, letting it catch the sunlight. "Look, Hansel," you'd whisper. "When we get home, we'll buy you a real toy soldier, one with a shining sword." He would giggle, momentarily forgetting his exhaustion, his eyes wide with childish dreams. You then quickly tucked the coin away, ensuring it remained hidden from any prying eyes. This act of concealing wealth, especially in a time of precarious survival, highlights a pragmatic historical concern that overt display of riches could attract robbers or lead to further exploitation, a common narrative in tales of found treasure. As you continued your journey, you started to notice subtle changes in the forest. The trees, though still tall, seemed a little less ancient, the undergrowth a little less tangled. You began to see more signs of human presence, faint wagon ruts alongside the path, occasional discarded tools, even distant sounds that might have been human voices carried on the wind. Each sign was a balm to your weary spirit, a tangible step closer to salvation. One of the more peculiar things you encountered was a large, gnarled tree stump, unlike any other you had seen. It was enormous, clearly the remnant of a colossal ancient tree, but its surface was strangely smooth and polished, as if countless hands had touched it over centuries. Around its base were small, scattered offerings, withered flowers, smooth pebbles, even a rusty, broken needle. It felt like a place of ancient reverence, a spot where forest dwellers or travellers paid homage to something unseen. You quickly steered Hansel past it, a prickle of unease running down your spine. Such venerated natural landmarks were common in pre-Christian European animistic beliefs, representing powerful spirits or places of significant energy, and often seen as either benevolent or malevolent depending on how they were approached. You didn't want to risk offending whatever entity resided there. You encountered a small, swiftly flowing stream that intersected the path. Its water was crystal clear, cold, and refreshing. You drank deeply, allowing the cool liquid to wash away the dust and fatigue. Hansel splashed playfully, his laughter echoing in the quiet woods, a sound you hadn't heard in days. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a brief reprieve from the grim reality of your journey. As the afternoon wore on, the path became wider, more clearly defined. You saw more signs of human activity, felled trees piled neatly, small clearings where temporary camps had been set up, and even a distant, faint echo of a dog barking. Your heart soared. These were not just signs of survival, they were signs of a community, of people. However, a chilling thought pricked at your newfound optimism. What if your parents were searching for you? What if they had changed their minds? The thought should have brought comfort, but instead, it brought a wave of dread, the memory of their abandonment. The cold calculation in your stepmother's eyes was a wound too deep to heal so quickly. You had survived the witch, the forest, and your own desperation. You had earned your freedom and your fortune. Returning to the very people who had cast you out felt like a regression, a surrender of your hard-won independence, the psychological aftermath of abandonment, particularly for children, is a complex area of study, and tales often grapple with the conflicted emotions of reunion versus independence. This internal debate was a silent torment. You also worried about the gold. How would you explain it? Too ragged, lost children, suddenly appearing with a fortune in precious metals and jewels. It would arouse suspicion, questions, and perhaps even greed. You knew you had to be careful, to find a way to re-enter society without drawing undue attention. As the sun began its long, slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, you saw it. Through a sparse patch of trees, beyond a low ridge, Smoke rose from several chimneys, distinct and undeniable, and then, faintly, carried on the breeze, the distant sound of church bells. It was the evening vespers, a familiar sound, a comforting rhythm that spoke of order, of peace, of home. "Hansel!" you whispered, your voice choked with emotion. "Look." He looked. His eyes, so often clouded with fear and exhaustion, now widening with awe, he saw it too. Not just a wisp of smoke, but the definite, unmistakable silhouette of a village nestled in the valley below. Houses, small but real, clustered together, their windows beginning to glow with the soft, inviting light of hearth fires. With a surge of renewed energy, you began to run, pulling Hansel along, ignoring the protest of your aching muscles. The path descended steeply now, leading directly towards the village. You stumbled, but kept going, driven by the sheer force of your will. Hansel, too, found a burst of adrenaline, matching your pace, a hopeful cry escaping his lips. The air grew thicker with the smell of wood smoke. Mingling with the comforting aromas of cooking food, you could hear the distant chatter of voices, the playful barks of dogs, the faint strains of a lute. It was a symphony of normal life, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the forest or the chilling cackle of the witch. As you neared the outskirts of the village, a dog, a shaggy medium-sized mutt, barked once, then wagged its tail tentatively, approaching you with a curious sniff. It was a harmless greeting, a simple, ordinary interaction, but it made tears stream down your face. It was real. You were here. You walked past the first few scattered cottages, their windows glowing warmly. You saw a woman tending a small garden, a man splitting logs, children playing a game in the fading light. They looked up, their expressions a mix of surprise and pity at the sight of two ragged, dirty children emerging from the woods. No one recognized you, and you did not recognize them. This was not your village, but it was a village, and it was safe. You kept walking, following the main path that wound through the heart of the settlement. The sounds grew louder, the smells more intoxicating. You passed a communal well, a blacksmith's forge, and then a small, bustling inn, its doors open, inviting. The light spilling from its windows was golden and warm, the sounds of laughter and conversation, a beacon of normalcy. You paused, hand in hand with Hansel, standing at the edge of the inn's light. This was it, the threshold. You had escaped the wilderness, survived the witch, and carried a fortune. The future stretched before you, uncertain but filled with possibilities. You would not go back to your old life, to the hunger and the abandonment. You would forge a new one, here or somewhere else, armed with your wits, your terrifying experience, and your hidden gold. The journey was not over, but the darkest part was behind you. The true test now was how you would live with the memories, and how you would build a new life from the ashes of your past. The bustling warmth radiating from the inn was a stark contrast to the cold desolation you had endured. The scent of roasted meat, stale ale, and wood smoke wafted out, pulling you in with an almost irresistible force. You and Hansel, still hand in hand, stood on the threshold, two spectral figures emerging from the shadowy embrace of the forest. The villagers inside, caught in their evening revelry, were oblivious to the horrors you had witnessed, the violent act you had committed, the fortune you carried hidden beneath your ragged clothes. A boisterous laugh erupted from within, followed by the clinking of tankards. It was a normal, human sound, and for a moment, it was almost overwhelming in its normalcy. Hansel tugged at your hand, his eyes wide, drawn by the light and the promise of safety. You took a deep breath, the lingering smell of the witch's house fading with each passing moment, replaced by the comforting scent of hearth and home. You pushed through the heavy wooden door, the bell above it jingling softly, announcing your arrival. The noise level inside was immediate and almost deafening. The inn was packed, filled with farmers, merchants, and what looked like a few travelling tinkers. All conversation stopped as every eye in the room turned towards you. 2 small, dishevelled children, covered in dirt and forest grime, standing awkwardly in the doorway. A hush fell over the room, the laughter dying on people's lips. You felt a wave of self-consciousness, acutely aware of your tattered clothes, your unkempt hair, and the fear that still clung to you like a shroud. You instinctively pulled Hansel closer, his small body trembling beside yours. Then, a large stout woman, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen, emerged from behind the counter. She had kind eyes, though a formidable presence. "Well, bless my soul," she exclaimed, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Where did you 2 spring from? You found your voice, though it was little more than a whisper. We're lost, we ran away." The lie fell easier this time, less painful than the truth of abandonment, and it invoked immediate sympathy rather than suspicion. The trope of children running away to escape hardship was a common narrative, often understood by communities to imply some form of neglect or abuse at home, thus eliciting compassion rather than direct inquiry into their specific circumstances. It was a strategy for survival, a social deception. The innkeeper's expression softened further. "Poor dears. Come in, come in. Don't just stand there. You look half-starved." She bustled towards you, her ample frame radiating warmth. She led you to a small, secluded table in the corner, away from the prying eyes of the other patrons. "Sit," she ordered kindly, pulling out 2 wooden stools. "I'll fetch you some stew, and a warm washcloth." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving you alone for a moment, the murmuring conversation slowly resuming around you. You still felt exposed, but the immediate threat had passed. You were no longer just 2 lost children, you were 2 lost children being cared for. Soon, she returned with 2 steaming bowls of thick, hearty stew and chunks of crusty bread. The aroma alone was intoxicating. You ate ravenously, your hands trembling as you spooned the warm liquid into your mouth. Hansel, though still quiet, ate with equal fervour, the food a balm to his starved body. This was real food, wholesome and nourishing, unlike the witch's insidious fattening meals. It was simple, and it was perfect. As you ate, she brought a basin of warm water and a soft cloth, gently wiping the grime from your faces and hands. Her touch was tender, maternal, and for a moment, a wave of profound sadness washed over you, a longing for the comfort you had lost. You focused on the food, on the warmth, on the safety of the inn, trying to push away the memories of the recent past. "You said you ran away," the innkeeper prompted gently, "once your hunger was somewhat sated. From where? Dears, do you have family?" You looked at Hansel, then back at her. This was the moment of truth. You couldn't tell her about the witch, about the gold, about the abandonment. It was too much, too dangerous. You needed a simple story, one that would elicit sympathy without demanding too many questions. "Our parents, they're gone," you said, letting your voice tremble slightly. It wasn't entirely a lie. They were gone from your life, effectively. A fever, it took them. We tried to stay with our aunt, but she couldn't feed us. We had to leave. The tale was a common one in those harsh times, of families decimated by illness, of orphan children forced to fend for themselves, orphanhood and subsequent wandering due to famine, disease, or war were tragically common occurrences in pre-modern European societies, making this a highly plausible and sympathetic narrative for the villagers. It explained your presence, your destitution, and your desperate journey. The innkeeper's eyes filled with pity. "Oh, you poor children," she murmured, reaching out to pat Hansel's head. "Such a tragedy. Well, you're safe here now. My name's Martha. You can stay here tonight, in the stables. It's warm and dry, and tomorrow we'll see about finding you some work. or perhaps a place with a kind family. You nodded, a rush of relief washing over you, a warm, dry place. Work. It was a start, a chance to rebuild, to create a new life. You discreetly patted the heavy bag of gold hidden beneath your cloak, a secret source of power that would ensure you were never truly at the mercy of others again. You would earn your keep, yes, but you would also have a safety net, a way to secure your future. You spent that night in the inn stables, the air thick with the comforting smell of hay and horses. It wasn't a bed, but it was warm and dry, and the familiar sounds of animals snuffling and shifting in their stalls were a comforting presence. Hansel fell asleep almost instantly, a deep, exhausted slumber. You, however, lay awake for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of the inn, the distant hoot of an owl, the quiet snorts of the horses. Your mind drifted back to the witch, to the fiery end she met. A chill ran down your spine. The act felt surreal, a horrific dream. You had killed her, a monstrous act for a child, but you had done it to survive, to save Hansel. Was it right? Was it wrong? The lines were blurred, indistinguishable in the harsh crucible of survival. The ethical ambiguities of violence, even in self-defense, particularly when perpetrated by the innocent, were often explored in traditional narratives as a means to grapple with the harsh realities of a violent world and the difficult choices people faced. This internal moral struggle was a heavy burden. The next morning, Martha, true to her word, found you both work. You helped in the kitchen, washing dishes, peeling vegetables, sweeping floors. Hansel, too small for heavy labour, helped collect eggs from the chicken coop and feed the pigs. It was hard work, but it was honest, and it earned you your keep, a warm meal and a place to sleep in the stable. You were part of something, a contributing member of a small community, even if you were still outsiders. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. You slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The fear that had been a constant companion began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. Hansel, though still quieter than he once was, regained some of his childlike cheerfulness. He laughed more often, played with the stable dogs, and even made a few friends with the other village children. You, however, remained vigilant. You never spoke of the witch, or the gingerbread house, or the gold. The treasure remained hidden, buried deep beneath the straw in your corner of the stable, a secret known only to you and Hansel. It was your ultimate security, your ace in the hole, the promise of a future where you would never be poor or abandoned again. You learned to observe, to listen, to understand the rhythms of the village, the unspoken rules of society. One day, while cleaning out the inn's small storeroom, you came across an old, dusty book. It was a collection of local legends and folk tales. You couldn't read well, but you could decipher some of the words, and the illustrations were captivating. One page, in particular, caught your eye, a drawing of a strange, gnarled tree with offerings at its base, strikingly similar to the one you had seen in the forest. The text spoke of it as the Whispering Tree, a place where the spirits of the lost sometimes lingered, and where, if one listened closely, they could hear the echoes of ancient tragedies. This cultural detail of specific natural sites being imbued with spiritual or historical significance is a common element across many traditional societies, often serving as a repository of local memory and belief. It was a chilling reminder that the supernatural was not just a story, but a tangible part of the world you now inhabited. As you became more integrated into the village, you started to hear whispers about your own story, the poor orphans who had miraculously appeared from the woods. Some speculated you were from a distant land, others that you were refugees from a local skirmish. No one suspected the truth. No one suspected the gold. And no one suspected the grim act that had ensured your survival. You had successfully woven your own narrative, a new identity to protect your secret. But the memories were always there, lurking just beneath the surface. The smell of baking gingerbread, the sight of a roaring fire, the taste of overly sweet food, all could trigger a fresh wave of nausea. A sudden chill. You learned to suppress these reactions, to present a calm, ordinary facade to the world. You were a survivor. Yes, but survival came at a cost. The innocence of childhood had been shattered, replaced by a hardened pragmatism and a deep, unspoken knowledge of the darkness that existed in the world. One evening, as you watched Hansel playing with the other children, his laughter ringing out, clear and unburdened, you felt a strange mix of sorrow and fierce protectiveness. He would never truly remember the worst of it. You hoped. You would shield him, guide him, and with the gold you possessed, you would ensure he had a life free from the hunger and fear that had shaped your own. The journey was not just about survival. It was about building a future, about reclaiming what had been stolen from you, and doing it on your own terms. You had entered this village as helpless, abandoned children. You would leave it, eventually, as masters of your own destiny. As months stretched into seasons, the village, once a temporary refuge, began to feel like a fragile home. You had both become adept at your chores at the inn, your small hands growing stronger, more capable. Hansel, completely recovered from his ordeal, flourished under Martha's watchful, kind eye. He was still quieter than other children his age, and you often caught him staring into the forest with a distant, thoughtful expression. But his laughter was more frequent, his steps lighter. He truly believed your fabricated story of orphaned misfortune, a comforting lie you meticulously maintained. You, however, carried the weight of your secrets like a heavy cloak. The gold, buried beneath the stable straw, remained untouched, a constant reassuring presence. It was your leverage, your ultimate escape route if ever needed. But you knew you couldn't stay in the stable indefinitely, nor could you introduce such a fortune without attracting dangerous attention. You needed a plan, a way to transition from impoverished orphans to self-sufficient individuals without raising suspicion. Your greatest asset, you realized, was not just the gold, but the unique experiences you had endured, the brutal pragmatism learned in the forest, the cunning employed against the witch, the sheer resilience that had brought you this far. These were skills that, if channeled correctly, could be far more valuable than any treasure. You observed the flow of goods through the inn, the itinerant merchants, the farmers bartering their wares. You saw opportunities, small at first, but growing. One evening, while helping Martha prepare the evening meal, you overheard a conversation between two travelling merchants. They were complaining about the unreliable delivery of certain herbs and spices from distant markets, how local suppliers were often overpriced or had inconsistent stock. A thought sparked in your mind. The forest, that same dangerous labyrinth, was also a source of countless natural resources. You had spent months traversing it, learning its flora and fauna, even if unwillingly. You remembered particular clearings, specific types of plants, the gathering of wild resources, from medicinal herbs to dyes and timber, was a significant part of the rural economy in pre-industrial Europe, often supplementing meagre agricultural incomes or providing niche trade goods. This was a skill, perhaps your only skill, that was born directly from your ordeal. The next morning, you approached Martha. "Mistress Martha," you began, your voice steady, though your heart hammered in your chest. "I have noticed the merchants often need certain wild herbs. I know some of them, from my old home near the woods." You chose your words carefully, vaguely referencing your past without revealing too much. Martha looked at you, surprised. "Indeed, and you know which ones are safe, and which are useful?" You nodded. "Yes, mistress. I can identify them, and I'm swift." She considered this, her brow furrowed. "Well, It could save us some coin and earn a bit more from the merchants, but the woods are dangerous, child, even for me. I am careful. You insisted. Your gaze unwavering. You didn't mention your harrowing experience, but your quiet determination, the subtle strength in your posture, seemed to convince her. She agreed, albeit reluctantly, to let you try. Starting with common herbs found closer to the village edge, your initial forays into the forest were tentative, fraught with a rekindled fear. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory, every rustle a ghostly echo of the witch, but you forced yourself to push past it. You focused on the task at hand, identifying the plants, carefully harvesting them, remembering their growth patterns. You moved with a quiet efficiency, your senses heightened, constantly aware of your surroundings. You found valerian root, known for its calming properties, wild thyme, used for flavouring and medicine, and a variety of edible mushrooms, though you were exceedingly cautious with these, relying on very specific knowledge to avoid poisonous lookalikes. You soon discovered you had an uncanny knack for it. Your heightened senses, honed by months of survival, allowed you to spot rare plants where others saw only green. Your memory, sharpened by trauma, recalled every detail of the forest floor. You brought back bundles of herbs, clean and well preserved, surprising Martha with their quality and quantity. The local apothecary, a wizened old man named Master Alara, was particularly impressed. He recognized the quality of your finds, often paying you a few extra copper coins, which you meticulously added to your hidden hoard. Hansel, too, contributed in his own small way. You wouldn't let him venture deep into the woods with you, the memory of his captivity too fresh. Instead, he became your apprentice in the process of drying and preparing the herbs, learning to bundle them, to identify their scents. He enjoyed the work, and it gave him a sense of purpose, of contributing to your shared future. Over time, your knowledge of the forest deepened. You began to explore further, always with caution, always with a return route firmly in mind. You discovered hidden clearings rich with berries, secret groves where rare medicinal plants thrived. You even learned to identify tracks, to listen to the subtle warnings of the birds. The forest, once a place of terror, slowly began to transform into a resource, a landscape that, though still dangerous, was no longer entirely alien. However, the witch's house, and the exact location of your abandonment, remained a place you avoided. It was a dark spot on your mental map, a place of unspeakable evil that you hoped to never see again. You learned to navigate around it, circling wide, almost instinctively, as if an invisible force repelled you from its cursed grounds, the lasting psychological impact of a traumatic event, often manifesting as avoidance behaviours and a heightened sense of danger in certain environments, is a well-documented phenomenon that transcends historical periods. It wasn't just physical distance, it was a mental and emotional barrier. One spring day, as you were gathering wild garlic by a small stream, you stumbled upon something unusual. It was an old, rusted metal box, half buried in the damp earth. You dug it out, your heart pounding with a familiar mix of dread and curiosity. It was heavy, and when you managed to pry open its corroded latch, you found it contained, not gold, but a collection of ancient, leather-bound scrolls and a few odd, intricately carved wooden figurines. The scrolls were brittle with age, their script faded and indecipherable to your unlettered eyes. The figurines depicted grotesque, twisted figures, almost animalistic, almost human. They emanated a strange, almost unsettling energy. You quickly reburied the box, a shiver running down your spine. This was something darker, older than even the witch, and you wanted no part of it. This discovery of ancient, potentially pre-Christian artifacts or pagan relics is a subtle nod to the layered history of European folklore, where older beliefs often intersected with newer ones. sometimes leading to tales of forgotten magic or cursed objects. It was a chilling reminder that the forest held more secrets than just the witch. As your skills grew, so did your reputation. Gretel, the forest child, they called you. A whisper of admiration and a touch of awe in their voices. You were known for your sharp eyes, your quiet demeanour, and your uncanny ability to find exactly what Master Alara needed, even obscure ingredients. You never told anyone where you truly came from, maintaining the consistent story of orphaned wanderers. The gold remained your secret, a constant, silent promise. You began to dream, not of the witch, but of a future, a small cottage, perhaps, with a thriving herb garden, enough to live comfortably, to provide for Hansel, to ensure neither of you ever faced hunger or abandonment again. The gold was the foundation, but your newfound skills were the building blocks. You were not just survivors, you were builders. The hardest part was the lingering ghost of the past. Sometimes, late at night, in the quiet of the stable, you would hear Hansel whimper in his sleep, a fainted, distressed sound that brought back a fresh wave of grief. You would reach out, comfort him, remind him that he was safe. But for you, true peace remained elusive. The image of the witch, her face distorted by fire, was etched into your memory, a permanent scar. You had walked through hell, and while you had emerged with a treasure, you carried a part of that hell within you. The village, for all its comforts, was merely a stepping stone. You were learning, observing, gathering strength and knowledge. The world was vast, and there were other villages, other markets, other opportunities. You knew that eventually you would have to leave, to find a place where your past was truly unknown, where you could truly start anew, shedding the last vestiges of your traumatic history. The gold would allow you that freedom, that fresh start. But the journey of healing, of truly escaping the psychological clutches of the forest and the witch, would be a far longer, more complex path. The seasons continued their relentless cycle, bringing with them a sense of slow, deliberate healing. The chill of winter gave way to the vibrant green of spring, then the oppressive heat of summer, each passing month adding another layer of distance between you and the horrors of the gingerbread house. You and Hansel had truly integrated into the village life, your story of orphaned hardship now a quiet background home, rarely questioned. You were no longer the lost children, you were simply Gretel and Hansel, the capable, if somewhat reserved, young herbalists. Your reputation had grown. Master Alara, the apothecary, now relied heavily on your foraging skills, often giving you lists of rare or difficult-to-find plants. You had a sixth sense for them, a quiet knowledge of the forest that no one else in the village possessed. You knew which mosses clung to the north side of trees, which birds sang before a storm, and the subtle scent of approaching rain. This intimate connection with the natural world, forged in the crucible of your survival, was now your greatest strength, your unique expertise. This practical knowledge of the environment was highly valued in pre-modern agricultural societies, where understanding natural patterns was crucial for farming, foraging, and even predicting weather. Your survival skills had become marketable. Hansel, too, continued to thrive. He was still your shadow, always by your side when you weren't deep in the woods, helping you sort and dry herbs, meticulously labelling the pouches. He still kept his chicken bone under his straw mattress, a secret comfort. But the overt signs of his terror had faded. He played with the other children, his laughter ringing out, carefree and genuine. You watched him, a fierce wave of protectiveness washing over you. His innocence, though once lost, was slowly, miraculously, being reclaimed. The gold, your secret treasure, remained buried, untouched. You added to it diligently. Every copper coin earned from Master Alara, every small payment from a merchant. Slowly growing the hidden hoard, It was a source of immense quiet power, a promise of absolute freedom, but you knew the time wasn't yet right to reveal it. You needed to learn more, to understand the world beyond this small village before you could truly leverage your fortune. You spent countless hours in the inn, listening. You observed the merchants, learning about trade routes, about prices in different towns, about the goods that were in demand. You listened to travellers' tales, absorbing snippets of information about distant cities, about the dangers and opportunities of the wider world. Your mind, once focused solely on survival, now devoured knowledge, preparing for the day you would leave. The memories of the witch, however, remained. They were not as raw, not as immediately terrifying, but they were ever present, like an old scar that aches in damp weather. The smell of burnt sugar would occasionally trigger a phantom stench of singed flesh, and the sight of an oven, particularly a large one, would send a cold shiver down your spine. You never spoke of it. Not to Hansel, not to Martha, not to anyone. It was your burden, your solitary truth, the long-term psychological impact of childhood trauma, manifesting as persistent intrusive thoughts, anxieties, and a tendency towards secrecy, is consistent with modern understanding of PTSD, indicating a timeless element of human experience. This silent battle was your daily reality. One particular memory that haunted you was the uncanny, unnatural silence around the witch's cottage, even after your escape. You noticed that the section of the forest where her house had stood remained eerily quiet. Birds rarely sang there, and small animals seemed to avoid it. It was as if the land itself remembered the evil that had resided there, a place where the natural world held its breath. This subtle, pervasive anomaly was a constant, chilling reminder that some scars on the world ran deeper than any human could comprehend. You also found yourself unconsciously analysing human behaviour, a skill honed by the need to quickly discern friend from foe. You could read faces, interpret subtle gestures, sense underlying motives. You noticed the avarice in a merchant's eyes, the weariness in a farmer's slump, the genuine kindness in Martha's easy smile. This sharpened perception, born of necessity, served you well in your dealings, allowing you to navigate the complexities of village life with a quiet astuteness beyond your years. As you approached adolescence, a new restlessness began to stir within you. The village, once a safe harbour, now felt confining. Your skills as an herbalist were well established, your reputation solid. Hansel was growing, learning quickly, ready for new experiences. And the gold, that silent hidden promise, called to you with increasing urgency. You had more than enough to buy a comfortable life, to purchase land, to even start a small business. But more importantly, it offered the ultimate escape, the freedom to choose your own destiny. Untainted by the past, you began to speak to Hansel in hushed tones, late at night, whispering about the possibilities. "We could go to the big city, Hansel," you'd murmur, sketching imaginary maps in the dust, where there are grand markets and fine houses, and no one knows our story. His eyes would widen, reflecting the dim light from the stable lantern. He trusted you implicitly, his world still revolving around your unwavering presence. The time finally came. You carefully, meticulously, unearthed the gold and jewels from their hiding place. The linen bag, once small, was now heavy, filled with the glinting promise of a new life. You exchanged a small portion of the gold for a more manageable sum of silver and copper coins with a travelling merchant, explaining it as a distant inheritance, a tale he readily believed, blinded by the unexpected bounty. This act of conversion, of liquidating a portion of your wealth, was a symbolic step, transforming the raw treasure into usable currency, truly unlocking its power. You approached Martha with a heavy heart, explaining that you wished to seek your fortune elsewhere, to find opportunities in a larger town. She was sad to see you go, but understanding. "You're good children," she said, her eyes welling up slightly. The world is big, and you deserve to see it. She packed you a generous supply of food in a sturdy, new satchel for your journey. The morning of your departure was clear and crisp. You stood at the edge of the village, Hansel clutching your hand, looking back at the familiar cottages, the bustling inn, the kind faces that had offered you sanctuary. A profound sense of gratitude, mixed with a bittersweet melancholy, washed over you. This village had saved you, had allowed you to breathe again, to recover, but it was time to move on. As you turned to face the open road, the path stretching out before you, you felt a surge of quiet power. You were no longer the abandoned, starving children. You were survivors. You were inheritors of a terrifying legacy. Yes, but also of a vast fortune, and of an unbreakable bond. The forest, once your prison, had forged you, hardened you, and ultimately provided you with the means to escape. The witch, though dead, had inadvertently paved your path to freedom. You walked away, not looking back. The road was long, the future uncertain, but for the first time, it was truly your own. You carried the weight of your past, the scars of your ordeal, but you also carried the gold, the knowledge, and the fierce, unyielding determination to build a life on your own terms. The journey from the woods had ended, but the real story of your lives, shaped by fire and fear, was just beginning. You had truly survived the woods, and in doing so, you had redefined what it meant to live. And so, the story of Hansel and Gretel draws to a close. It's not a sparkling fairy tale ending, filled with twinkling lights and chirping birds, but a quiet, somber conclusion, steeped in the harsh realities of survival. Imagine yourself, after all that horror, standing on the threshold of a new life. The cicadas outside may have quieted, or perhaps you're simply too exhausted to hear them anymore. The image of the dark forest, the dazzling yet deadly gingerbread house, and the flickering fire from that terrifying oven all seem to fade into the night, becoming a part of the past, of memory. Though never truly erased, you've come a long way, overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Now, let your mind drift, relax every muscle, every lingering thought. The tranquil night will embrace you, lulling you into a deep, peaceful sleep. Let these final images dissipate, like faint wisps of smoke in the calm air. You are safe now. Sleep calls, good night, and have sweet dreams.